Hello my honeys, it's Emmie. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Emmie. I'm a nutritionist and the creator of the Slim on Starch program. If you want to join the Slim on Starch program, or if you just want a free one-day meal plan, go to healthymie.org or click the link in the down bar. Also make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell because your girl uploads a new video every Wednesday and Saturday at least. Today we are talking about my blood type, which is bread. We are talking about my religion, which is bread. And we're talking about my number one hobby, which is, you guessed it, bread. In my last video, when I did a what I eat in a day when I'm sick, I was having bread and I asked you guys, do you want me to do a video where I go over the types of breads that are healthy, the ones that I would recommend that you have? And the response was overwhelming. So here I am talking about the healthiest types of bread, what to avoid, what mistakes I see people making when they're trying to incorporate bread, and how you can be a healthy honey that incorporates bread and still reaches your goals. Whether your goals are weight loss, weight maintenance, weight gain, muscle gain, you're gonna know the right type of bread to choose no matter what your goals are. If your goal is health, and I always say when you focus on health, if you're looking to lose weight, when you focus on health, you lose weight as a side effect, but when you focus on weight loss, you lose health as a side effect. It really should be everybody's goal watching this video to be healthy. That should be our number one goal. Health, health, health over any weight goals. So the number one question that people usually ask is bread healthy? I thought that bread was unhealthy. Aren't carbs unhealthy? No, carbs are the body's preferred source of fuel, which means that our body is going to thrive when it receives something like bread because bread is high in carbohydrates. Carbohydrates contain glucose. Glucose is another sort of word for our intents and purposes for carbohydrate, which means when our body receives bread, that is like putting gas in your car. It's putting fuel in the tank, and your body is going to burn that energy. It's not going to store it as fat. I'm really not quite sure where in the literature this got so convoluted that people believe that carbs readily turn into fat, because actually it's quite the opposite. Carbs are readily burned for energy. So incorporating bread in your daily routine, if you are just getting into this plant-based lifestyle and you don't know what to eat, you can have bread. And so let's talk about the types of bread that you can have. And if you still don't believe me that you can have bread and be healthy and lose weight, let me show you some of the results of my clients that are eating a lot of carbohydrates. These are real people. Now, the top two mistakes that I see people make when they are looking for a good bread. Number one is they go into the traditional bread aisle, the one that looks like this. If you're going into this part of the bread aisle, then you're going to be met by products that are high in preservatives and additives because they're going to sit on that shelf forever. Instead, what we want to do is either one of two things. Number one, look for fresh bakery bread. And you don't have to go to some fancy bakery to find this. You could go to Walmart. Walmart has a fresh bakery. You can go to Stop and Shop. They have a fresh bakery. Pretty much any big grocery store is going to have their fresh bakery bread. You just have to know where to look for it. And it's to go toward the bakery section. So believe it or not, I want you to walk toward the cakes and the pastries and the muffins because you're probably going to find some really high quality fresh bread there that was just baked, maybe even that day. Whereas if you go into the bread aisle, you're gonna find stuff that's been sitting there for a week. So the number one mistake I see is this: people going into the classic bread section when really you should be going toward fresh bakery bread. You can go to an actual bakery. You could go to Panera Bread. You could go to Le Pain Conatin. How do you even say that place? Does anybody know how to say that place? You could go to a Walmart. Anywhere that has that fresh bakery, I want you to walk toward there first. The number two mistake that I see people making when they're looking for bread is they're not looking at the ingredients list. The ingredients list is the keys to the kingdom when you want to know whether or not something is healthy and you should be having it. What I often see happen is people mistakenly look at the label and they look for those buzzwords like high fiber, protein, low sugar, and they're not looking at the ingredients list, or they look at the nutrition facts. Neither the title of the bread and the terrific marketing nor the nutrition facts is really going to give us insight into what is actually in this bread. Instead, we want to look at the ingredients. Bread should be made from the following: flour, water, yeast, and salt. That's really all that should be in there. So when you go to these bakeries, if you're picking up a French baguette, sourdough bread, or ciabatta, you're probably going to be really impressed by the ingredients that you see, because most of the time it is what it should be, which is flour, water, yeast, and salt. For anybody that's in France that is watching this, they're probably like, yeah, what else would you guys put in your bread? That's all that really should be in there. And when you go to bakeries, or when you go to Walmart and you go to the bakery section of Walmart, you're going to be really surprised, because you're going to look at the ingredients and say, oh my goodness, Emmie was right. This really is only made from flour, water, yeast, and salt. You might see some other things in there, just some little thickeners or some minor preservatives, but nothing in comparison to what you're going to see in that classic bread aisle. When you go to the classic bread aisle, the ingredients list is like a CVS receipt. It just never stops. And then you'll find animal products in there. You'll find milk. You'll find butter. You'll find oils. You'll find eggs in the classic bread aisle. We want to stay away from the classic bread aisle and go for the nice, freshly baked bread, which should just be made from flour, water, yeast, and salt. Now, there are a lot of different types of bread when you go to the fresh bakery. I've talked about French bread, I've talked about sourdough, I've talked about ciabatta, but you are probably going to find other types of breads that likely are not ones that are going to be aligned with just having the flour, water, yeast, and salt. Once you get into the fancy type of breads, there's the breads that have milk in them. The brioche bread has butter in it. Challah bread has eggs in it. So you want to stay away from those. A French baguette is almost always a good bet. A ciabatta is almost always a good bet. And a sourdough is almost always a good bet. Just double check on what the ingredients are. And if the ingredients are listed, you should be able to ask what the ingredients are, and they'll be able to provide you with a list. And usually if they don't provide the ingredients, that's actually a good sign, because it means that there's not a bunch of junk in there, and they probably are just like, what do you mean, ingredients for bread? It's just flour, water, yeast, and salt. I actually also want you to be wary of the wheat breads. You often hear when people are getting, very simplistic beginner advice about bread, you hear them say, choose brown bread over white bread. I do not agree with this advice, because some of the healthiest breads are white breads. And that sounds crazy, and somebody's probably going to cherry pick that and be like, what is this girl saying? But hear me out. Usually when you get these brown breads, they're the breads that I talked about in the bread aisle that have all of these additives and all of these preservatives, and sometimes even add in things that like animal products. But when you get these fresh breads from the bakery that are just made from flour, water, yeast, and salt, how can you beat that? There's 4 simple ingredients that we all know what they are, in comparison to these highly processed, highly marketed brown breads that appear to be healthier, that are packed with protein and low in sugar and high in fiber. They have so much added into them. It's like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? This is a lot of ingredients. So I would not just simply base, is the bread healthy, off of if it's white or if it's brown, because a lot of brown breads can have a lot of additives to them. You always want to go for the ingredients list. If you take anything from this video, let it be that you look at the ingredients list and you say, is it just flour, water, yeast, and salt? Is there anything else added to it? And if there's other things added to it, I would not recommend. I also did want to mention, this is a little bit of a hot topic, but glyphosate. Glyphosate is, bread is a pretty highly sprayed, or wheat rather, is pretty highly sprayed. So if you can get organic, I would recommend getting organic. I'm usually not a big organic snob, but wheat is pretty highly sprayed, so it usually is recommended that if you can, to get organic breads, and they're really not that much more expensive. And I think you'd be surprised by what you find when you look at the fresh breads, how many of them just happen to be organic. For example, when you go to Trader Joe's, which let's just start there with the Trader Joe's products that are Emmie approved when it comes to bread, there's quite a few. There's sourdough bread. They're straight up sourdough bread. They have a multi-grain sourdough. I'm gonna approve that one. Okay, Bear. Hi, handsome. I have this mat for you. That's your mat that you sit on, okay? So mama can work. There's also a Trader Joe's pumpernickel bread that I enjoy that has great ingredients. Trader Joe's has these French organic rolls that I'm gonna approve. They have great ingredients. They have ciabatta rolls that I would approve. They have a French baguette that I'm going to approve. And guess what ties all of these products together? You look at the ingredients list and you see flour, water, yeast, and salt. And you might see different types of flours. So you might see that there's a wheat wheat flour, you might see that there's a sourdough starter in there, but it's going to be a simple combination of those ingredients. Again, you might see multiple types of flour. That is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that it's multi-grains. They're using a lot of different types of flours, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, if we want to get nitty-gritty, you're going to want to go for flour that is not enriched, and you want it to be unbleached, because sometimes with the white flours, they do bleach them, which isn't the best thing in the world. So if we're getting into the nitty-gritty, then going for the unbleached whole wheat flour is technically going to be healthier. But what you sometimes do find is that with those whole wheat flours, they're adding in a lot of sugar because the whole wheat flour doesn't taste so good. So in these cases, I would probably recommend just going for the one that has more simplistic ingredients that doesn't have all of the sugar added to it. The next bread that I'm going to recommend is the Ezekiel breads. There are so many different types of Ezekiel breads. There's a plain bread, there's a sesame bread, there's a cinnamon raisin bread, and these are actually sprouted breads. Sprouted breads mean that they're made from sprouted wheat as opposed to wheat that's been turned into flour. So a lot of the breads that I was talking about before talking about the Ezekiel bread are made from a flour, where they take the wheat, they mill it into a flour, and then they take the flour and they turn it into a bread. But with these sprouted breads, it never gets to the flour stage before it turns into bread. It goes straight from being a sprouted wheat germ into being a bread. So it's a little bit less processed. It's still the same amount of calories. It's still about 1,200 calories per pound, just as any other bread. It's just a little bit less processed, which it can digest easier. If you're gluten-free, you might do better and you're trying to transition to eating bread. You know, these breads are not gluten-free, but if you are trying to transition back into eating breads, this might be a good place to start. Sourdough is also a good place to start because it's easy to digest, but I would definitely recommend any of the Ezekiel breads. The next bread brand that I'm going to recommend is the When Pigs Fly bread, and you can find these at Whole Foods. Now, they have a lot of different flavors, so what you're going to want to do is use the trick that I taught you in this video, which is to look at the ingredients list. Here's an example of one of their breads. Here's their sourdough bread. Now, if we look at their ingredients, we see that there is unbleached flour, cider, evaporated cane juice, salt, and yeast. So the cider is what they're using instead of the water. So that's the liquid. That's not a big deal. Evaporated cane juice is another name for sugar. So there is some added sugar in these. We want to know how much added sugar there is. So when we look at the nutrition facts, what we find is that they'll tell us how much added sugar there is. And it looks like there's just a teeny tiny amount of added sugar, just a gram of added sugar, which is not the end of the world. I think that this is something that I would give the okay on, and I would give the seal of approval on, just because it's just a teeny tiny amount of added sugar, which you sometimes do find with breads, especially the healthier breads. You're going to find that with a lot of the unbleached, unbromated whole wheat flours, they usually do add a little bit of sugar to it. So it's just a teeny tiny amount. So I would give the okay on these. Now, I'm not saying that you can have all of the When Pigs Fly breads, because some of them do have a lot of junk added to them. So you're going to want to watch out, but make sure that you look at the ingredients so you can choose the best one for you. Next up is the Dave's Killer bread. I get asked about this bread all the time, and you want to be careful because not all of them are ones that I'm going to recommend. A lot of them surprisingly have a lot of added sugar, which I couldn't believe. However, if there is one that I would give the okay for, it would be the Dave's Killer Bread Organic Power Seed, because this one, it is sweetened, so it does have quote unquote a little bit of added sugar, but it is sweetened with some fruit juice, so it's not the worst thing in the world, and it's quite a small amount. So it only contains about a gram of added sugar, and if you look at the ingredients, we see that it's organic whole wheat flour, a mix of seeds, some gluten, and don't worry about when you see gluten, that's going to occur in bread naturally. Some oat fiber, some salt, and some more flour and enzymes. And I'm not quite sure what the whole cherry powder thing is, but it doesn't seem too scary to me. But you do see that there is about 1 gram of added sugar in this one. That's going to be the lowest amount of added sugar. The other Dave's Killer breads, you know, I was quite shocked looking at the other ones. There was like 5 grams of added sugar per slice, which I just could not believe. Let me pull up an example here. Okay, so here's a great example. Dave's Killer Bread, the whole wheat bread, has 4 grams of added sugar. And that's what I talked about earlier, that usually you'll find that the whole wheat breads do add back in a lot of sugar. And then the breads that are the more simplistic breads, like the baguette or the ciabatta or the sourdough, the ones that aren't packaged up like these, aren't gonna have the sugar added because they're nice and fresh and they don't have to make up for any taste because they are trying to be shelf stable. Okay, now I've pulled up the Walmart French baguette, and this is gonna get approved from me. It's made from flour, then they've added back in some of the, like niacin, iron, that does happen, some folic acid. You will see that happen sometimes, it's not the end of the world. Water, dough conditioner, some malt, some preservatives, some salt, some vinegar, some yeast. This is actually going to get the approval from me because this is pretty standard when it comes to these bakery breads. And the main takeaway here is when you walk into a store, I want you to walk straight to the bakery and I want you to look at the fresh bread, the ones that probably don't even have labels on them, and ask for the ingredients. The ingredients should be flour, water, yeast, and salt. Sometimes they do have some conditioners or some iron or some niacin or some folic acid that's added back in. It's not the end of the world. You just want to make sure that they're not adding back in any oils, milk, eggs, honey, butter, because sometimes those things will be added back in. But go straight for the bakery. Don't go for that classic bread aisle. No Pepperidge Farm, no, none of that stuff. None of the Wonder Bread. No. We want to go straight for the bakery. Get the simplistic bread, the French baguette, the sourdough, the ciabatta, the stuff that's just made from those simple ingredients. If you can, get organic, because wheat is a highly sprayed crop. And so if you can, get the organic and be confident. You got this. You've watched this entire video. And if you've made it to the end of this video, I want you to comment confident, because you got this. You know what you should be having. Keep it simple. No crazy additives, no butter, no oil, no milk, no eggs, flour, water, yeast, and salt. This is what so many civilizations were built off of. We talk about the bread basket when we talk about ancient civilizations in Africa and Egypt. And these were extremely healthy people that ate tons and tons of bread, or in the Middle East, a lot of the bread that was there. These are extremely healthy people. So bread is healthy. Bread is one of the keys to life. And I hope that this is helpful in helping you choose the best bread for you. So I love you, honeys, and I'll see you in my next video.